Lord Seventh, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 14. Near the year's end. It wasn't yet time for lights out, but the light in the room had already been dimmed down. Ch14 sat on a pattern-engraved wooden chair. His hand gripped a teacup, though he did not drink it, merely unconsciously using his finger to dangerously cut at the cup's rim as his eyes stared straight at the floor. Ch14 sat to the side, unmoving and unspeaking. His thin body was like a chunk of practically withered and dead log, and at first glance, one wouldn't take notice of his existence in any manner. All of a sudden, Ch14 viciously slammed the teacup onto the ground, boiling water splashing everywhere. A young maidservant waiting outside the door immediately came in upon hearing this, then leaned over and used her hands to pick it all up in a panic, only for Ch14 to interrupt her with a shout. "You dog slave! Who said you could come in?" Scram! The maid jumped in fright, the tips of her scallion-like fingers made bloody from being cut by the broken porcelain. Not daring to speak out, she bowed at once and withdrew. From beginning to end, Ch14 said nothing and did nothing, as if he had entered meditation. The splashed tea had stained his boots, yet he didn't care much, not even pulling back his feet. Ch14 couldn't sit still, though, slapping the table as he stood and went to pace around the room. "He's nothing more than a barbarian, nothing more than a little bastard born from a whore. He actually wants to climb above my head, relying on that iota of dignity the old man gives him." He used all his strength to slam the side of the side table. Feeling that his anger was unabated, he swept out his long arm, thus sweeping all the bonsais and tea sets on it to the ground, breaking them into a spread of shards. Both hands propped him up on the table as he panted harshly. If I don't kill him, then I'll have to write my name backwards." Only now did Ch14 start to speak with unbelievable slowness, his voice excessively hoarse, as if rusted iron pieces were slicing against each other inside him. "Be calm and don't be hasty, Second Highness. As I see it, that chaminette was just walking the same way as the Crown Prince by coincidence. They aren't necessarily affiliated." "Crown Prince." Ch14 sat down, laughing in derision as if saying the title aloud had fouled his mouth. "Ch14 is merely a little brat that hasn't grown hair yet." "What kind of Crown Prince is he?" Ch14 nodded. "That's just it. You are a man who must do great things. There will be a time to tidy them up later on, so why trouble yourself to bother with them now? The most important one at present is the big boss. Helian Zhao has a wolf's ravenous ambition, and you should focus on planting spies in the army. A group of crude men wouldn't be a cause for great worry, but if you take a laid-back attitude on it and he happens to grow his full wings in the future, the fight for forced abdication will not have a good conclusion." Ch14 gave a heavy huff, listening to Ch14 go on. "There's only the little matter of Ch14 being personally appointed as the Crown Prince by the Emperor, in the end. Even if you gain power later on, I'm afraid that you'll have to expend a good amount of effort to be able to earn your proper title." The other sneered. "He has such a weak personality, even nodding politely to all the eunuchs in the palace when he sees them. Does he have the foundation of even a half-crown prince? The minus father emperor races are nobler than him." Ch14 stroked his sparse beard, shaking his head. "Though he's not a cause for concern, you cannot underestimate him, either. You should also pay some attention to Jing Beiyuan. Prince Nanning shuts himself up at home and rarely goes out, but he's able to receive no small amount of the emperor's favor these years. He paused slightly, his broom brows furrowing. This humble deist always feels there to be something strange about him. He's a teenager with no constraints from parents or brothers, yet he has the capacity to live by himself over these years. Were it not for him going to listen in on court after the new year, it's probable that he would never leave the Prince Estate's gates. It's really a bit curious. Even I realize that he's an embroidered pillow that's happy to eat, but reluctant to cook. Ch14 responded flippantly. Why should you worry so much, deist? Deistly set down his teacup. That may not be true. It's likely that, in the crown prince's heart, Prince Jing is some amount of special. Ch14 wavered, seemingly recalling something, then displayed a slightly lewd look on his face. That's right. Jing Beiyuan isn't a useful person, but he's getting more attractive with each passing day, and Ch14 frequently takes walks to his place, harboring whatever intentions. The crown prince has continually restrained himself to being diligent and prudent over these years, thus purchasing the reputation of being strict on how he treated himself yet lenient on how he treated others. He's perhaps only just having the first stirrings of affections, and likely isn't truly aware of his own feelings. Ch14 raised a fine brow. How do you say this? Deistly just smiled mysteriously. I still need to take another observation. Incidentally, someone was brought to mind when I saw Prince Nanning today. A family had given me assistance back when I was destitute, and they had a daughter named Ch14, who's just 17 this year. Later on, both her parents chanced upon a plague and died of it, and she went along the streets begging by herself. The boss of a theater troupe took a liking to her and brought her up. Over several years, she sang herself into a bit of fame, and entered capital some time ago. She heard someone talking of me, so she came to me seeking shelter. Remembering her family's kindness, I accepted her as a goddaughter. Ch14 stared blankly, not understanding what he was getting at. Come to think of it, deistly went on, Ch14's features look quite a bit like Prince Nanning's. What a coincidence. The other mumbled to himself for a time, then grinned. I'll come and meet you another day. Deistly smiled and said nothing. During this meeting, someone came to the door to make a report, saying that a subordinate of Sir Zhao's had arrived to give New Year's gifts to the Second Highness. The trajectory of his thoughts interrupted. Ch14 was a little unhappy. Which Sir Zhao? He asked gruffly. Sir Zhao Zhenshu of Baitun Field, the domestic declared back. Only then did Ch14 snap out of it, and in 1 second, the indignant look he had went away, revealing a meaningful smile. Hurry and go, invite them in. Not long after, the Zhao subordinate arrived, followed by several large trunks that were placed down one after the other. The subordinate saluted Ch14 with a heap of smiles on his face when he saw him, paid his New Year's respects to him in advance with the utmost of respect, then readily opened a box. Ch14 cast a glance at it, noted that the inside was full of stuff like some fabrics and embroidered goods, and smiled, saying a few polite words and having someone arrange things so that the guests wouldn't be slighted. After the subordinate left, Ch14 stood up, then had his confidant take the cloth and such out of the trunk. As it was, the New Year's goods material was just one layer, and underneath it was a box full of gold bars. That was also the case for the other several trunks. The gold, silver, pearls, jewels, and other articles were dazzling. Ch14 eyed them one by one, after which he was satisfied, getting the servants to carry the trunks away. Without a doubt, such generous New Year's gifts were not things every family would have, even if they were titled nobility. As the new year approached, everyone was in a big rush, some preparing gifts, some paying back gifts, some entertaining guests, some sacrificing to their ancestors, and some worshipping the Buddha, all going their numerous ways. Even business on the streets was a bit livelier than usual, since after penny pinching for a whole year, everyone was ultimately looking forward to the end of the year where they could pamper themselves well with food and drink, all of them having some visible jubilation on their faces. The population of the prince estate wasn't much. On top of that, a few elders had been let go to return home in recent years, but Jing found too many people troublesome and thus refused to allow Ping to go by new people. As that was so, during festivities, Ping could be seen striding along with his not long legs, running east and staggering west, his heels kicking the back of his head in his rush. Jing leaned against the doorway of the study, watching him unfeelingly as he stretched out his back. "Well, then. I'm just an idler, and me being a bar here is obstructing your view, so I'm going out for a walk." "You sure are busy, Ping. Ping peered at him with resentment. Jing smiled, then turned to walk out. "Where are you going, master?" Ping quickly said. "Who should I call to go with you? Are horses prepared?" Jing languidly waved him off. "Prepared for what?" "No one needs to go with, I'm just going to go to the chaminette and wait a bit. It's only a few steps total. If something happened, I'd be able to hear you yelling in the yard from over there." He strolled out. Ping, unwilling, was about to throw aside his account book and follow him out, but he was stopped by Ji Xiang's far-reaching voice. "Steward Ping, come over and take a look, quick. Sir Lu sent things over, how should we respond?" In a single second, there was no longer any trace of the prince who didn't care about their household. Ever since the time they returned from High Scholar Lu's, Wuxia opened up on subjects, and Jing also freely acknowledged that after they came to stand together on a pirate ship, that layer of indistinct alienations had apparently gotten much lesser. Wuxia discovered the reality that the other just had a relatively great amount of things revolving around in his mind, and he wasn't at all a harmful person. Furthermore, he was enthusiastically inquisitive, and communicating with him was better than those great Qing folk with mouths full of phony propriety. There was much more openness and ease, without so much hypocrisy. From the moment he came to the chaminette estate for a tour and saw that the other was training parasites and raising toxic critters, he took the estate to be a hunting ground of curiosities, coming over whenever he had time to see if there might be new stuff. In truth, it wasn't strange that Jing could be viewed as widely learned in some respects. The ghosts and ghouls of the human world, the demons and monsters of the underworld, the grotesque, the sinister, the deplorable, and the miserable, he had already seen it all. At times, nothing was interesting, leaving him feeling bored. However, he had never gone to Nanjiang in any of his lifetimes. The moment he went to Wuxi's place, everything was fresh and new, and actually drew the idea of traveling the world out of him, with a slight desire to roam to its ends. He wouldn't have to take account of anyone, nor would he have to be preoccupied with anything. When he thought about it, he had so many reincarnations, but they all revolved around one person, never giving him the chance to take a closer look at this massive world. Was that not a great pity? Even the entire band of Nanjiang folk in the estate were clicking their tongues in amazement. Towards the methodology of shamancraft and keeping toxic creatures, the great Qing's pampered high officials seemed to be afraid of something, thus taking both things to be extremely dangerous, monstrous work. They had never seen one rushing to get close up like this. Following Wuxi's finding of the guileless little prince crouched in the corner as he mutually stared at a multicolored, venomous scorpion for a time, after which he tried to reach out and catch the thing's tail because he wanted to see how many colors it actually had. The former wasn't sure whether the guy was ignorant and fearless, or reckless with everything. Previously, he had believed that the other would roll everything he was going to say and do around in his head quite a number of times beforehand as a malicious flatterer. He hadn't been aware that, upon getting to know him well, Jing-Chi would actually be this clueless, out of touch, impulsive, and liable to do something as soon as he thought of it. It was unsurprising that he'd heard people say the great Qing's emperor favored him, as the senior and junior were truly different melodies played at the same skill level. After that point, so long as Prince Nanning graced them with his presence, the entire estate would get the considerable feeling that they were facing a huge adversary. After all, the lordling could be labeled as the only friend their own taciturn master has had for all these years, and they could never genuinely allow him to get into a snag, lest he died here due to his own curiosity. Arriving at Wuxi's estate on this day, Jing-Chi discovered that there was no New Year's atmosphere, everything being no different than it was before. The little sable squatting by the doorway had already gotten familiar with his face. When it heard a commotion, it raised its head to sweep its little eyes at him, then paid him no more attention, turning around and aiming only its butt at him. His heart tickled. Jing-Chi picked up a small stick and teased it with it. The sable remembered that its master had berated it when it went to bite this guy last time, so it didn't dare to mind the walking disaster this time, merely skewing its head to look at him with disdain, then putting its back to him and sticking its rump out as it shifted to the side. He was unforgiving, continuing to prod it until the sable decided that dodging was too much trouble. It slipped away in escape, jumped a couple of times, then went right into a person's arms, aggrievedly digging its head in deep and only exposing its tail to the outside world, thus putting everything out of sight, out of mind. Wuxi had heard word of his arrival, so he answered, came out to greet him, and got greeted head-on by the sight of the sable he had raised pouncing into his embrace like it was fleeing for its life. Don't tease it, he said, slightly exasperated, its teeth have poison. The new antidote still isn't mixed up. Jing-Chi he-he-he'd, tossing the small stick away, standing up, and flicking dirt off himself. I liked it as soon as I saw it. How about you hand it over for me to keep for a few days? The little sable poked its head out to peer at him, then stuck its head into Wuxi's arms again, but pointed at him. Jing-Chi rubbed his chin in some awkwardness. Seems it doesn't like you, Wuxi supplied honestly and bluntly. Jing-Chi tsked, then followed Wuxi into the house, talking as he walked. It's the new year, how come you don't have any activity here? Does Nanjiang not have one? Wuxi paused. It does. Jing-Chi startled. Inclining his head to look at him, he saw Wuxi smoothing out the sable's fur with both his hands, a somewhat bleak look in his eyes. He understood what he meant. New Year's was to be spent with family, but if one was floating on the outside by themselves with no one familiar in sight, what difference did it make? It was simply other people being troublesome, and only made one more prominently lonesome. This kid, he wasn't big, but his thoughts were outstandingly solemn. Jing-Chi reached out and pat him on the arm. The day was cold, and though the little green viper was slightly drowsy from human body heat, it was woken up by the vibrations he made. It stuck its head out to glare viciously at him for a spell, its tongue flicking out like a threat, after which it got cold and went back. A temple fair will start on New Year's Day in the capital, and on the eve, there won't be a curfew, Jing-Chi explained. The commoners will be making merry all through the night. You've been here for however many years yet have never gone out to one, right? I'll take you to go broaden your horizons this year. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.